All right, so we're gonna get started, and you can tell me in the chats your name and where you're from. And we will get started. All right, so can you ladies see that? All right, so welcome to Global Birth Community. So you want to be a doula. So becoming a doula, I know that when I started, I had a lot of questions. I didn't necessarily know what I was getting into. And so I get asked questions all the time as a doula trainer. Um, can you explain this thing or that thing, or what's the difference here and there? And so I thought, hey, it might just be easier to do a Q&A every once in a while and answer everyone's questions. So my goal is that you'll walk away tonight with a lot more information than you had coming in, and get your questions answered so that you can feel more confident in whatever decision is that you make moving forward. So a little bit about me. So my name's Shanna. I have 6 kids here on Earth, and then we have 2 in heaven. And we got married really young. I got married out of high school, and we started right away having a family. And so I was very young with our first baby. And all my friends were in college, and I was having a baby. And I thought you just walk into a hospital and you have a baby, and that's just what you do. Like, it's not a big deal. And that wasn't really my experience. My husband was in the military, and so our first was born on a military base. And I would say that that care is even very, very different than just a normal hospital. And so it was a very traumatic birth. And 2 years later, we had our next son. And so this is a picture of our third, which is our daughter. But the second birth was very uneventful, and I was just like, oh, so birth didn't have to be like that, which actually made our first birth a little even more traumatic, because I just thought that's how everybody's birth was. And so I was already an EMT, and that just made me want to dive deeper into why this birth was like this, and why this birth wasn't like that, and why were they so different, and how do I help women have the better birth. So in my experience, training hundreds of doulas, is that most women come into wanting to be a doula because they've had kids, and either they had a really traumatic birth and then they learned more after that, and they were like, hey, I want to empower other women to have a better birthing experience than I did. Or they had the most beautiful, wonderful birth that you can imagine, and they want everyone to have that perfect, beautiful birth that they did. Those are the 2 most common reasons. And then I would say about 10% of the women that I train are not married, don't have kids yet. Younger, I've trained high school seniors, and all, every age all the way up to late 60s. And it's usually a birth experience where they saw their mom give birth to a sibling, or they saw a cousin or a sister give birth, or something sparked that love for birth early on, and they want to most likely go on to be a midwife, but they want to start being a doula. And so, but the overwhelming majority is one of those 2 things: traumatic birth or the most perfect birth. And I have a fellow doula that is joining us, Christina. And so I thought I would have her on to answer. So you get 2 of us to answer questions too. But Christina, if you want to chime in, which category do you fall under?
I fall under both.
Okay.
So I didn't become a birth doula until after my second was born. But my first birth was traumatic for me. And I if you've had a birth and it was traumatic, guys, like, own it. Like, you can say it was traumatic. And I know, even if it wasn't as traumatic as other people's births, just, it's your birth, it's your experience. Your trauma is valid. So it's okay. Okay. You don't have to compare yourself and be like, oh, I had a traumatic birth, but I didn't die, or I had but this, no, you had a traumatic birth. You had plans, it didn't go the way you expected it. Something about it traumatized you. And the more that you try to like put it down that it wasn't as bad, the more you hold on to that trauma. So for you to heal, you need to accept it, okay, and own it. So I had a traumatic birth. My birth with my oldest did not go the way I planned. Um, for us, it was just an
Recording in progress.
escalation. It was an escalation of interventions that just kept snowballing. Um, my body, the way it reacted to birth was really weird. I had like severe edema that when you would touch my legs, water would just come out of my pores. I would have to put towels down on like the bed and on the couch because water was just coming out of my skin. If you have ever seen like the first original X-Men, and there's like that mayor that gets like the shot and he turns into like a blob, that's how I felt. I felt like I was just like this watery blob spilling water anywhere I went. It was awful. Because of that though, they thought that, you know, maybe you have preeclampsia, even though all of my tests kept showing that I didn't have it. So they decided that I needed to be induced, and I prayed against being induced, and thankfully my water broke on its own before my induction date, but it broke on Labor Day. So yeah, that wasn't awesome. My doctor wasn't there. The just it was just all, like I said, intervention out of intervention. So it was traumatic for me. And at the end of his birth, they ended up doing a vacuum assisted birth, and no one told me that the sound of the vacuum popping off of your kid's head sounds like your kid broke their neck. So I was prepared to give birth to a dead baby because I heard the vacuum come off my baby's head, and it is a horrible cracking sound. And my baby was born, and he was not crying right away. I think he was like just in shock as much as I was, and was like, what the heck is happening? So we both were just like, oh my gosh, what the heck is happening? And I look lost and confused in the pictures with him. And I can't even remember like anything like postpartum with him because it was just insane. And then we had a very difficult breastfeeding journey. So with my second child, I decided to try to find different alternatives. And I was taking a childbirth education class. I went through Hypnobabies, and I really enjoyed it. And in that class, there was a birth doula who was being trained through DONA, and she needed some births. So we hired her to be our doula. We had a great experience with her. She's amazing. Her name is Julie. She's a very, very good friend of mine. She was my birth doula for my second and my third babies back home in California. And she was just awesome. And she kept telling me, you would be a really good doula. You'd be a really good doula. And I was like, girl, I don't have time for that. I have two under two. Like, no. Okay. I can't even do that. But, you know, she planted that seed, and it began to root, especially as I had friends come along who were like, hey, can you give me some advice on, I don't know, what doctor should I see, or what childbirth education classes? What do you think of this? Or is there anywhere outside of like especially in my hometown? I grew up in this like podunk cow town, and I was living in the big city of San Diego. So I'd have my friends in my hometown, and they'd just be like, where should I give birth? And I'd say, anywhere but El Centro. Get out of there. Come up to San Diego and come give birth in San Diego. Do not go to Mexicali. Come up to San Diego. Like, don't go to Mex. So that planted that seed. So that's when I started looking into doula work. My daughter's birth was awesome. It was very, very healing. I took so much charge from the moment that I realized that I was pregnant with her. Um, you know, no one told me you could fire your OB, but I fired my OB. I was seeing an OB, and my daughter is a surviving twin, and we lost her twin at I found out I was pregnant and miscarrying at the same time, because I was about, I think Jillian was going into 14 weeks, but we had lost her twin at 12 weeks. And every time I took a pregnancy test at home, they came out negative because I was miscarrying. So when I went into the doctor, they told me, oh, you're miscarrying. And I said, oh, okay. And they're like, let's, you know, it's the weekend, come back on Monday and we'll do a ultrasound to make sure you don't need a DNC. And I said, I agreed to it because I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I don't want to get an infection. And so when I went in for the ultrasound to confirm that my little girl, well, that my baby was gone, they were like, oh my gosh, there's another heartbeat in another sac. And there was my daughter, the surviving twin by herself. So I was like, oh my gosh, I lost a baby and I have a baby. And the doctor kept calling the baby that we lost an invaluable, what are they called? A non-viable fetus and non like tissue. And I was like, no, because she was like trying to plan when my next OB appointment would be with her. And I told her, I don't want you to be my OB. I'm done. I'm going to go to a different doctor because you suck and you won't acknowledge my baby. And so I was like, oh, wow, that felt really good. But from there, I hired a different doctor and it was good. And I told him my plans and he was just like, okay, sure, lady. Like you want to have a natural birth in this hospital and you want to walk like from your house to the hospital. It wasn't that far, but I was like, yeah, I want to walk like a couple miles because I know my body now. I know that my body needs that jump start. So I'm going to do it my way. And he was like, okay, whatever you say. And I did it and it was cool and I was very happy. And he thought it was the craziest thing that I walked in labor, but I did. That was like my goal. I was like, I'm going to walk from my apartment to the hospital. And so I did. And I'll remember it always because it was a Wednesday night and my pastor drove by us and he said he wanted to stop to see if I needed a ride. And then he realized what was happening. So he kept driving. And when he got to church, he was like, everybody pray for Christina because I'm pretty sure she's doing that crazy idea of walking to the hospital while in labor. He's like, I think her doula was following. There was a car following very close. And I was like, good job, Pastor Mary. You're right. That's exactly what happened.
That's
But that was our experience, and afterwards, after she was born and everything, and a couple months later, and I had Julie just, Christina, you'd be a really good doula. You'd be a really good doula. And I was like, well, I'll try it. We'll see. And San Diego has a lot of wonderful options as your doula journey. So I feel really fortunate that I got to start there. But like I said, I had that traumatic experience, but then I also had this really awesome healing birth with my daughter. And then I became a doula.
awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, so being on call, I think, is the number one question I get asked because, again, most doulas have little kids, which is what brought them in one way or the other. So being on call is different depending on what kind of doula you are. But if you are a labor and birth doula, then you're generally on call from 37 weeks to 42 weeks. So that's your full term window. And then if I have a client go into labor before that, I would obviously do everything I could to be there as well. But if that means if you take a client every once a month, even every 6 weeks, even generally those on-call times will overlap, which means you're always on call 24/7. So that is really hard, especially when you have little kids. I will say, and that's a question that I get asked all the time too, is what do you do if you have little kids? And so finding childcare is literally, I think, one of the hardest things about being a doula. And so if you have a spouse or a mom or a grandma or someone who can fill that. So I homeschool, Christina homeschools. I would say I've had a lot of success with helping other people find homeschoolers who are teenagers who can drive. So teenage girls who can drive that come from homeschooling families are great because they're available anytime. If you need to leave during school hours, they can usually come. But having good childcare makes all the difference, and you need somebody who can be on call. So when I first started, my husband worked from home, so he was able to be home when I needed to go to births. And then my kids got a little bit older, and I had my sister-in-law come over, and now they're old enough that the older ones can watch the little ones if I have to go to a birth. But that is a really hard one, and finding that childcare can be difficult. But that's something that we do navigate through and process through and try to brainstorm, depending on where you live and what your options are. So, but that's a big one because it feels like you're always on call. And so learning to kind of relax and learning to figure out how to refill between births is really important too, because it can be very, very exhausting and draining. So I feel like I did skip one. I was like, where did that one go? So the different kinds of doulas. which would have made sense before the on-call, which is why I was like, what in the world? So there's birth and labor doulas. So birth doula, labor doula, same thing. Just some organizations call it one, some call it the other. But these are women who work with women during prenatals and prenatally, and then they attend the birth, whether that's at a birth center, hospital, home birth, whatever that looks like. And then they meet with them generally in the postpartum to go over birth related things. And then, so that was where doula started. So doula is a word that means woman servants. So really, they coined it that for women serving women. And so it started in birth and labor in the late 60s, and then that's transitioned into doulas for everything, really. I had a dream several years ago, and I was telling my husband that I was at an airport and I ran into a person, and I said, what do you do? And they asked me, and I said I was a birth doula, and they're like, well, I'm a dog doula. And I was like, a dog doula? And they're like, yeah, I help dogs give birth to puppies. And I woke up and I was just like, there really is a doula for everything. I've never met a dog doula, but they might exist. But so a postpartum doula comes alongside of a woman after they come home from the hospital, or after the baby is born. And postpartum doulas can look a lot of different ways too. So some only really care for the mom in the postpartum. Some care for just the newborn in the postpartum. Some care for mom and newborn. Some just do like household things like run errands and clean and pick up, and let the mom just spend all their time with the baby. So there's a lot of different realms to postpartum doulas and what they offer. Some even stay the night, and they're night postpartum doulas, and they get up with the baby during the night so the mom and dad can sleep. Bereavement and loss doulas, they work with women who have miscarriages through stillbirth, even into that first year of having a newborn, if there's like a genetic disorder, disease that someone passes in that first year. So bereavement and loss, I always suggest that eventually, if you love being a doula, whatever kind of doula you are, to get some training in that, because eventually you'll come across that. So 1 in 5 pregnancy end in loss. And so if you're working with growing families, you're going to encounter that loss. And so you want to be prepared for that. Some people solely do that. But even if you don't, getting some kind of training in there, because you will come across it, and it's good to be prepared. So fertility doulas help women to get pregnant. And adoption doulas can be for the mom who gave birth and giving the child up, or the mom who is receiving the baby. And so there are adoption doulas for both sides as well. So there's a lot of different kinds of doulas. We offer birth doula training and postpartum doula training, and we're working on rolling out fertility doula training in the future as well. So those are the things that that we offer. And then in that, we do talk a little bit about bereavement and loss, but it's not a certification. So how do you choose a training? So I know that's why a lot of you guys are here, because you have a lot of questions. So there's a lot of different options, which didn't used to be true. Like when Christina and I got trained, it was pretty much in person. That's how you got trained. And then there was some online, but very few online. But now you need to choose a lot of different things. So do you want online or in person? We do both, and we did a hybrid version actually a couple weeks ago where you did half online and half in person. So that's not even on here, but that's a thing too. Classroom or self-paced. So do you want a program that lets you just do it at your own pace, and you do it a little bit here and there and you work through that? Or do you want something where there's other students and interactions with the teacher? You really want to figure out your birth philosophy and what that looks like. So in birth, there's a lot of different underlining philosophies of birth. So there's like everything needs to be natural, or everything needs to be out of hospital, or some trainings are very spiritual, and some trainings are very not spiritual, and some are very like a woman has control over it. Like there's just a lot of different birth philosophies out there. So making sure you align with what that looks like is really important, because I know a lot of people who train with some big organizations, and they get all the way to the end, and then there's a statement of ethics and they don't align with those ethics, and then they're like, what do I do now, because I did all this training, but now I don't feel comfortable aligning. So figuring out if you are comfortable and align with that organization first is really helpful, so you're not wasting time and money. And language is also another big one. So more and more of the big organizations and the smaller organizations are going to inclusivity and cultural and language and gender inclusivity. And so a lot of organizations now say birthing person, chest feeding, body feeding, not being able to say mom, woman, that sort of thing. It's always partner and birthing person. So our organization, our birth philosophy is very, it's a Christian-based organization, and we use biblical language. So we do say mom and dad and husband and wife and mother and all of those things. So some people don't like that. Some people do like that. So knowing what kind of language that the organization uses is super important. What are the requirements and the time frame? So some people, I get a lot of emails where people are like, oh, I have a birth of my best friend in 2 months. Well, if you want to be certified to go do that birth in 2 months, you probably don't want an organization that takes six months to a year. So each organization has different requirements and timeframes. So you want to look into that and see what that looks like, to make sure that it aligns with your budget as well. And then cost, so time and then cost. So cost can really range from, I would say the average is around $600 for a birth doula training. But then you could add on extra fees, testing fees, books, other requirements, like some require CPR training or other trainings that you would just have to get outside. So everything that we have, you do, except for the books, are included. So looking and making sure that you understand all the costs and fees is super important too, because I do work with a lot of people who come to us because recertification comes up. So every 2 to 3 years, depending on the organization, you have to go back and pay another fee to be able to stay a doula and do all these things. So make sure you understand what it looks like, not just the first time, but do you have to do that every 2 years, every 3 years? What is the ongoing cost? We don't have that. We have a lifetime certification. So yeah, we wanted it to not be about money. And so we made it so once you're a doula with us, you're always a doula. So what do I charge? That's another big question I get a lot. So that really depends on your area. So if you live in a bigger city, like Christina lives in a much bigger city than I do, she gets to charge a lot more than I do. So my city is about 500 to 600,000. And Christina's is a couple million, like 2 million. You don't know. So I live in a much smaller, I live in the second biggest city in our state. She lives in the biggest city in our state. So that gives you an idea. But I would say most doulas range between 800, I would say 800 to 1200 is the average range. So like smaller counties, smaller cities, 800, bigger cities, more like 1200. And then if you get like a medium city, if you get to a bigger city, you're talking 1200 to 2000. If you're talking California, sometimes they're over 2000. So it really depends on the area, the need in the area, but the bigger the city, the higher cost of living really usually equates to what you can charge. So can I do this as a full-time or part-time job? So that's a great question too. So a lot of women have a job and they're transitioning, they want to transition out of whatever that job is into full-time birth work. And I like to tell them that it's just like any other business. So you're starting a business. And that usually takes a good 3 years sometimes to get full income from that. So there are different options that I talk to with my students. If you want to work towards that, there's a huge difference between the stability of postpartum training, doula training, and birth doula training, because birth is more sporadic and you can't really plan it. And it's hard to have another job when you have it, when you have births just coming up, versus postpartum doula training and equates to being able to set a schedule and have that guaranteed income because you're under a contract, whatever that looks like, for 6 weeks to 3 months or even longer. And so you know when those hours are and you know how much money you're going to make in that contract. So I suggest if you want to replace a full-time job with birth work, that postpartum is like a good foundation, and then add births into that. Because the nice thing about working with families who are having babies or just had babies is they understand what that means to have to stop and go to a birth. And we'll get into a little bit of that, of your guys' questions as well that you guys had with having little kids. So And childcare, we touched on that a little bit too, of really finding who those people are. I know that some neighborhoods or some daycares have drop-in daycare hours where you can drop off a kid. So it really depends on if you have one kid or if you have multiple kids. Are we talking about school drop-offs and pickups as well? And so finding that good childcare is literally one of the hardest things for sure, when it comes to birth work. So my why behind Created to Birth, the doula training, is to really make doula training accessible to all communities and all cultures. So I really have a heart to see women have the education and the knowledge and the support to be able to have the birth experience that they want, whether that's in the US or overseas. So I do a lot of training in person and online, all over the world. And I see how valuable it is to have that education and support. And so a lot of what we do goes to pouring back into the community. So locally, I train a lot of immigrants and refugees to be able to serve within their own community as birth workers, but then we also go overseas to do that as well. And I just see the value of what birth work does. And so I want to make it accessible to anybody, anywhere. So to answer some of your questions, so I want you guys to ask questions, and then I want to answer these as well. So do you guys have any questions? You can feel free to just like hop on and ask your question. I will actually stop this for a second. Do you guys have any questions that you wanted to ask?
I had a question, kind of just about with certification. So I'm obviously looking into different certification things and just wondering like pros and cons. I've looked into some. Obviously, I saw your slide that was talking about, figuring out if you want to do online or in person and all of that. But I've seen some that it's like it's a full year and you have to have this many, births that you witness and this much of whatever and all kinds of different things like that. So I'm just curious, like your thoughts on those things and kind of where those different certifications end up landing you. Like, is it kind of like a one size fits all? If you're certified, it's good. Or is it like there's going to be, some that it like this looks better, this is going to be more beneficial to you? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So originally there was one organization, which is DONA, which is Doulas of North America. And they kind of coined what a doula is. And then there was CAPA and ICEA. And so there was only like 3 big organizations for a long time, starting out. And then, so they kind of set the stage of what that looked like. But then when COVID came, that really changed the game. So you used to have to attend, say, 3 certifying births prior to becoming certified. And what happened with COVID, and even before this, but COVID really like changed everything. But COVID said, the hospital said, we don't want you coming in as a doula if you're not certified. Well, how do you attend births to get certified if you can't go to a hospital to get certified? So that really limited people's ability to get certified because they had to attend home births or birth center births that would allow them uncertified to then become certified. And so what we know, working with hundreds of doulas, is if you love this work which means if you continue to do this work, you love this work, because this isn't about money. This is not like a lucrative thing that you're going to make 6 figures and like just anybody can do it. Like, it's very exhausting. It's very draining at times. It's also got great things to it for sure. But you want to learn and you keep pouring into that, and you want to learn the next thing, and you want to know how to best do this and that. And I was looking over Christina's list of all she's done the last, like her whole birth experience of birth work. And I was like, man, she's got a running list. Like, and so do I. And so if you love it, you keep doing it. So you don't need an organization to say, hey, keep doing all of this stuff and keep learning and growing, because you're going to do it anyways. And then you have to pay them on top of it. And so it's, the big organizations are great, but they had their place like in the 70s. And I think that things have shifted a lot and they have not. And so, but what I will say about the big organizations, and I trained with one, Christina trained with one, like, they are more recognized if you want to get Medicaid reimbursement. So every state is different. Not all states do that, but more and more states are trying to do Medicaid reimbursement for doulas. And some states say it has to be this organization, or it has to be this or this organization. So looking in, if that's what you want to do, I always tell everyone, look into what your Medicaid reimbursement requirements are. Some say any certification, some say Ohio is different. They're doing things different, but Ohio says you have to take Ohio's doula certification to be a Medicaid reimbursement. So we don't care what other training you have. You have to go through this training we made up in order to be reimbursed. So like every state has a different requirement. And again, not every state reimbursed, but I'm just saying that will always be state dependent. So looking into that, but that's the only case where it might matter that you have like one of the three big names. If your state says we only recognize that for Medicaid reimbursement, but I say overwhelmingly, most doulas don't do reimbursement through Medicaid because it's a lot lower than what they could make on their own. And there's so many hoops to jump through, and there's so many months you have to wait to get reimbursed that more or less, my experience, more doulas leave that reimbursement than stay because they can make more money otherwise. Our state is in the process of it right now. I sit on the committees and I give my 2 cents. So we'll see what happens in our state, but that's the only time where I say like having one of those big name ones can be helpful. But other than that, our doula certification has been recognized in all the states that we have doulas, as well as 17 different countries. So we have not had any issues, except for, I do know there's like 1 or 2 states that only allow, like I said, certain big names because they lobbied for that. Yeah, okay, great. What other questions?
I was gonna add to that too,
Yeah.
real quick, Shanna. When you have the bigger organizations too, now private insurance is also willing to work with refunding for doula support. So that's another benefit to a bigger name. But I am more on Shanna's side. I agree, like 100%. Like, go with a smaller name, get that lifetime certification, and just do your continued education instead.
Yeah, I do HSAs. So HSAs don't care who you're certified with.
Yeah, me too.
And so that's where more and more come from. But most of my clients, I would say 90% of them just pay out of pocket. So it's not usually, but some of them do have HSAs, and that's not a big deal either. So yeah. Do you ladies have any other questions? I know some of you sent some questions. So if you think of one, let me know. How to get into being a doula with a breastfeeding baby at home. So I've seen this 2 different ways, whether they're a doula, whether they're a midwifery student or a midwife. Generally, it's all about proximity. So you either pump, and again, nice thing about working with women having babies is they understand babies and they understand the need to breastfeed and things. And so most of my friends and myself, it was either pump and, say, hey, I'm going to need to pump during birth or whatever that looks like. Or you have your husband or, your mom or whoever bring the baby to you. So, yeah, it works either way. So midwives, student midwives, doulas, pump, or if you're close enough to wherever that baby's being born, the husband comes in, you go feed the baby, do your thing, he leaves, comes back 3 hours later. So it really depends on, like I said, how close all those things are and who are the moving parts in that puzzle piece. But the wearable breast pumps were a lifesaver for me and several of my friends. Once my child got older, I would just do the wearable pump. I would go out, but I would go do the wearable pump. And yeah, that was my favorite thing. But yeah. So it's definitely possible. And again, it's not like you're going into most jobs where they're like, oh, you're breastfeeding, or, oh, you just had a baby. Like, this is like, oh no, I get it. I'm about to have a baby and I'm about to breastfeed. So it's the most like sympathetic, clients that you could have are ones in the same boat. Why should we choose this certification opposed to another Christian certification? So we are very ministry minded and missions minded. So we do teach business training for sure, because you are running your own business. But I also have a nonprofit birth organization. We do international trips. If you do our training, then you are eligible to come on those doula training trips and be part of that, to train up doulas in other countries. And but we really see birth work as ministry. We have a free monthly Zoom where we talk about what that looks like. And I have a different speaker every month that comes in and shares how the Lord led them into whatever birth position that they're in, birth work, prenatal, postpartum work, whatever that looks like, and how they see birth work as ministry. And so birth is one of 3 times in a person's life when they're most open to spiritual things. And so birth is really a battleground. And so it's very spiritual, whether people believe in that or not. And so it can go really far the other way spiritually. Like it's a very spiritual time. And so we really emphasize that. And we talk about that. We talk about if you want to do pro bono or work with low income families, or if you want to have a foundation, or if you want to have a ministry, or if you want to have a nonprofit. So we talk about all the business side, but then we also give those options from people who are experiencing that as well. And then we have that missional heart as well. I train a lot of immigrants and refugees. And like I said, we go overseas. And so being part of the program and being a global birth community doula, you get that opportunity to be part of that as well. And we're the only doula organization that does international trips like that allow alumni to come. Is a certification enough for getting a job with a midwife or some other doula service group? So we have had doulas who have worked with a doula agency. So doula agency is somebody who, gets together a group of doulas and they kind of do the marketing and the business side, and then they pay a doula to work within that organization so they don't have to get their own private clients. They have definitely accepted our doula training. As far as a midwife, I'm not really sure. So midwives don't usually have their own doulas. Sometimes they will have like birth assistants, and a lot of birth assistants are midwifery students or they're doulas. But midwives, I don't know anybody as a midwife who's directly hires doulas, but I will say that we talk about how to network and work with midwives so that you can be on their preferred doula list or get referrals from midwives to clients and things. And so, yeah, so definitely working with organizations and things or agencies, we have definitely had doulas do that. So what are the requirements, if any, for birth witnesses in order to be certified? We touched on that a little bit. So we don't require that. We give you that foundation and that confidence to go out and attend births, and then you will grow. And we have abilities and ongoing support to help you grow in that. But you kind of learn as you go. So you get the foundation and the confidence, and then you go do it. Every birth is different. Every time you learn something. Even now, every birth I go to, I learn something. So we could require you to go do 3 births to be certified, but that really wouldn't change anything. It would just give you 3 births under your belt. And so the goal is really to help you feel confident without that so that you can go do that. So how to start a private practice with the certification. So we talked, our whole last week of class is all about business building, how to network, how to market, how to get your clients. So we go into that because there's kind of a lot to it, and your different options of how you want to run your business, what that looks like. But we cover all of that. And my last question that I have is, I would like to know, as a doula, how to deal with doctors and nurses not always having pregnant mothers' best interests. For example, doctors who decide to go ahead with a C-section when there are more things that can be done. So a lot of that honestly comes down to you working with your clients, empowering them in the prenatals, giving them that education in the prenatals, and working through some of that and how to empower them to have their voice heard in some of those things. But there are times where you may have to advocate, but generally I have worked with my clients and given them the tools to be able to advocate for themselves. So we do deal with some of those differences, but it's about communication and really bridging that gap and picking the right providers for the client's birth wishes as well. So we go over all of that in the class. What are the ads on working private versus a hospital or a company? So it's really, so there's pros and cons to that. So if you work for a hospital, you get a set amount of money. But if you work privately, you get to set your own rates and you really get to build relationships with those clients. So my clients pick me and I also get to pick them. And then I get to go to their home and I get to build that relationship. So a big part of what I'm doing is actually building that relationship and knowing really what they want. Some hospital doula programs, you can get births, but you're not meeting with them prenatally. You're not building a relationship with them. So you're kind of just showing up in birth, and They're like, here's another person that you don't know. So in private practice, you get to know them. You get to know the husband, the wife, the mom, whoever is going to be there. And you're actually building a trusting relationship. When you work for a hospital base, you get to go to more births and you get to be on a shift, but you're not building that same relationship. And so it's still very much like I'm an employee of the hospital, and in a private practice, I am hired by them and chosen by them. So it is a different dynamic, but it works for some people. And then working for an agency, the difference is the agency gets a percentage of what you make. So that could be 20%, that could be 30%. Every agency is a little different, but say a doula, a client is paying a doula $1,000. Then you only get 700 of that, versus if you were in private practice, you get the full $1,000. The difference is, though, they're doing the billing, they're helping to advertise and get those clients. So it's kind of like you make less, but you put less time and effort into marketing. So there's pros and cons depending on what your contract looks like. And agencies only exist in the larger cities. So like where I live, there is no agency. So there are some doula groups and networks and collectives, but there's no actual agency. So there's other options too, where they don't take a percentage. You just pay like a fee to be a part of a group. But Christina, did you have something?
So with the hospital too, one of the downsides of it is that you don't get to charge your worth. So you're going to these births that you're going last minute to sometimes, and you don't know how long that birth's going to be. So you may, if you're doing private practice, maybe you charge 1,800, but at the hospital you're only charging 800. Another downside to working with a hospital is they only accept certain certifications. All of the hospitals here in Indianapolis only accept DONA or CAPA. They won't go outside of DONA or CAPA. So if you don't have that certification, you cannot work for them. I keep getting a hospital that keeps trying to add me to them to be their bilingual doula. And I keep telling them, well, I'm already certified. I'm not going to go take a DONA certification. I don't want to take a DONA certification. And they're like, yeah, but if you work with us, we'll pay for you to take the DONA certification. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to reimburse me. You're not paying for me. Like, so there's that too. And then with the agencies, like Shanna said earlier, depending on where you live, there might be a ton of agencies, or there might not be any agencies. Where I live, there's a ton of agencies. And it's the same thing where they try to, like, you can try to partner with somebody and then your partner gets poached and goes to go work with an agency instead. So those are like some of the downsides about agencies and hospitals as well.
Sometimes it's good to get that confidence in those first several births, but we also give you ways to do that as well, where you don't have to go that route, but you can, some do. Yeah. So as far as things that you can do, your two daughters are pregnant now, some advice. I would say, I know you're already going to take the training. So really starting to read those books from the book list and dive into birth. So listening to birth podcasts, just surrounding yourself with understanding how the body works and what that looks like to give birth. And then how do you help support that and educate that? And so, no, I'm really excited that you're doing the training for your daughters give birth. The market for bilingual doulas. So she can answer this because obviously that's her, but I'm super excited. So I'm bringing her on to help facilitate Spanish speaking doula training, so Christian doula Spanish speaking training, because I keep getting emails of all these people who are like, hey, we want a Christian doula training, do you offer it in Spanish? And I do not speak Spanish, and so I'm like, oh, I don't. And then the Lord brought me Christina, and she reached out to me, and I was like, this is great, because apparently people really want this Christian doula training in other languages. So that is my goal, to have more and more Christinas in different languages, so that we can serve more communities. And yeah, so what does that look like for you?
There is a market for it, yes. I've never like done, I'm not a math person. I'm sorry, so I can't give you percents. Like, math is just not my forte. I pay somebody to homeschool my kids in math, okay? Like, that's just not my thing. My husband's my accountant, so there. Math is not my thing. I am horrible with numbers, so I wish I could give you numbers. It was Valeria, I think, who asked that question, or I don't know, I saw a V, but we do need Spanish speaking. We need all kinds of speaking doulas, like different languages. It's needed. But Spanish is one of like the second largest languages here in the US. Like, we have a large Spanish speaking community here in the US, not just like one state, but in many, many states. I think here in Indiana, it's like the third, because I think Burmese is now the second here in Indiana.
Yeah,
I,
so we have a huge Burmese population here, but Spanish is second, well,
is it
third.
still second or is it third?
It's Burmese and then Spanish. And
And
I
then Spanish,
picked
right?
up
Yeah.
Spanish speaking doulas here, and they are so busy because
Yeah,
there's
like
only like two of them. So they're like
yeah, I
super
was gonna
busy.
say there's
Yeah.
only like two of us here in
Yeah.
Indiana. Like, so she knows of one over there. So now I'm gonna say there's three here, okay? Because here in Indianapolis, there's only me, and then the second one that's here in Indianapolis, she works for a hospital, which I think is the same hospital that's trying to get me to join them. But she works for a hospital, and like I know she's always busy. But the downside of her working at the hospital is that they try to sometimes get her to be like their interpreter, and that's like a big fat no.
Yeah.
Like they need to go higher. They need hospitals are required to provide an interpreter. So I don't
Awesome.
even
You're
know
gonna
why
be
they
the
try to
first
do
one in.
that.
So I know, sorry.
No,
She
you're
said she's
fine.
gonna be the first one in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So hopefully.
Yeah.
And she was just asking about our training. And so she doesn't even know that you're coming on. So that's super excited
Oh,
because
okay. Well, there you go.
yeah, so she's like the fifth person who's, well, she didn't even ask me, but now that I
Didn't
know,
even ask you, but now you have
yeah,
a five, right?
yeah,
No,
yeah,
yes,
awesome.
seriously. We have it's needed.
Yeah.
We're needed. We're
There's a
needed.
lot that Christina can offer, and I keep encouraging her
We're
to
needed.
do those things because they're needed. So we're working on her slowly.
Yeah.
How's the best way to get clients and referrals? And we go over that. So it's kind of like not something to easily answer in like one sentence, but we don't just say, here, this is how you give birth or help a woman give birth. Like, we want you to succeed in business too, because that's part of it, right? Is you can't serve families on emptiness. And so most women need some kind of reimbursement in order to do that. And so we want you to succeed in business. So the other thing I guess I didn't touch on too is, as far as like organizations go, if you do self-paced or you do like a big organization, you may not get a lot of feedback, or it might take a long time to get your emails answered. My goal and our goal is to be available, because I really want to doula the doula. Like, I want to pour into my students so that they can be successful. And that's how I multiply serving more families, because I'm only one person. So I can only serve so many families, and my family keeps telling me I can't serve that many families. So the only way to serve more families is to train and equip those who are serving more families. And so my goal is to have you succeed and to have that ongoing relationship. And so we work that out. And we give you those tools and things, and then help you along the way as well. So do you ladies have any other questions? I have a couple more slides.
Jana,
Yeah.
forgive me if you already answered this or if I should know it, but like, how long is the online class for the
Yeah.
birth doula and then the postpartum doula? And I see that your birth doula course is already like booked up for July, but I'm assuming they're separate courses. Like, you have
Yeah.
to take them separately, even if you buy them bundled together.
Correct. So
Okay.
birth doula training is 5 weeks. So we have it basically every month that has 5 Mondays. And then postpartum follows that. And so we have 4 more classes this year. So we have birth in July, and then postpartum in August, and then birth in September, and then postpartum in October. And we do the bundle deal. And so birth is 5 weeks, and then postpartum is 4 weeks. And then you can do them together, and you can do them either or. So most people do birth and postpartum because that's just how we offer it. But I have a bunch of people also in August taking postpartum first and then doing birth next, because July is already full. So you can do it either way. It doesn't really matter. They're separate, but then they do overlap a little bit as well. So yeah, so the actual lecture teaching part is about 20 hours, 20 plus hours, depending on how you do things, for each class. And yeah, birth is just a little bit longer because we do a meet and greet and kind of go over some things in the first week that we don't do in postpartum. But that's just the lecture phase. But then you have books and your community resource list and your bloodborne pathogen training and childbirth ed, and those things add on top of that. So the actual training is 1 month. And some women do all of the requirements in that 1 month and they're done. And some will do some of it like waiting for class to start. Like I have some students doing things in June, waiting for July's class to start. So you can do those other requirements before, during, or after. I have a lot of women who say, hey, just coming to the class is enough with little kids. And so I will do this and then I'll do the next thing after I'm done. So you can do it anyway, but you can do a full certification in 1 month if you want to hit it really hard. But I would say on average, it's about 3 months. They
And it's a lot
usually
of
do
good
the,
information.
yeah, they usually do the training and then they, you know, do a book report while doing some of the other stuff. And then they do the other book report and do some of the other stuff. And they kind of set goals and we talk about how to get it done in like 3 months. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah. I was about to get to that kind of.
And it's really good, guys. Like the training's really good. And I'm not saying it just because like I decided I wanted to take it just to see if I even wanted to be a part of GBC. And I thought because I've been doing this for 13 years that I was like, all right, whatever, I'm gonna just take it and it's gonna be like I already know all this stuff. I was shocked. I learned things I did not know.
Yay.
And I was just
exciting.
like, oh, okay, this is cool. Like I liked it. I love learning. So I was excited to learn.
Yeah.
And I really, really liked that one that I had told you about, like the fertility part of it. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Why have we not learned this before? So
You're going to be super excited when we have the fertility rollout. You'll have to take that. Melissa's going to teach that. So
oh, okay. Well, I will take it.
awesome. Yeah. So our birth doula training, our next one starts July 1st. And it did sell out at the end of May. And then August is postpartum doula training. It's half full already. And then we have again another birth and postpartum September, October, and then we'll take the holidays off and start again in January. But we do offer a bundle deal to take both of them, which is a really great deal of $7.99 for both of them together. And like I said, you can take them back to back, or you can actually like split them up even more. So sometimes like I have a July student, I think I have 2 July students that are taking birth in July and then they're taking their postpartum in October because they wanted to just do one thing all the way through and complete that certification before starting the next. So it really is up to you how you want to do it. When you do the bundle, you can do it back to back or spread it out. It's really up to you. Doesn't really matter to me. So
I wanted to add to that real fast too, like cost wise, guys. $750 for 2 classes is, I know it sounds like a lot, but it's not. In comparison to what other doula trainings are offering for just one class. I know that my training was I think it was around $1,800, and that was probably 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I know since then they have raised their prices and they're closer to like 2,000 something. So $750 for 2 for postpartum and birth doula training is a really good price. And that's actually what you could end up charging right out the bank when you're certified.
Yep. You could get one client and pay for
your classes.
the whole thing. Yeah. Like I said, I really want to make it accessible and affordable. And the way that I got here was actually the Lord said, hey, start a nonprofit, start training women to serve within their own communities, whether that was the Burmese Karen community. We have a huge Burmese refugee population here. If it is in the Hispanic community, if it's overseas, we've been to South Africa, we've been to Kyrgyzstan, we just went to the Philippines, we're going back to the Philippines, we're going to go to Mexico. And it only makes sense if the training is accessible to women of all communities and all cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those big organizations, they do offer different things, but it's very college based. It's very academic based, and it's not for somebody who English is not their first language. And so we wanted to have something accessible to women so that they can serve families and take that barrier away. So cost is a barrier and language can be a barrier. And we wanted to reduce both of those. And so yeah, separate, it's about $1,000, but if you do them together, then it's only $7.99. So most women go with that because it's what other questions? That's all I have. Do you ladies have other questions?
The cure would be Chinese and Indian, you know.
Offer lactation classes. We don't yet. So I have a amazing RN IBCLC. we do offer lactation in both basic breastfeeding in our birth and more in depth in our postpartum. But we have an awesome, very similar like-minded woman who who I'm working on. She teaches and creates curriculum for her own hospital, and she teaches and does curriculum in other countries as well. And so we're working with her to figure out what that looks like to have a lactation training as well. And yeah, so that's in the works. We're just trying to figure it out because she doesn't want to, she already teaches for an organization called LEC. And so she's got to figure out what that looks like and how does she want and at what level does she want to teach and train. But she was just at our in-person. We're hoping to have another in-person in Indianapolis in September and that I hope she'll come down for. But lactation, so fertility is definitely this year and lactation will be next year, hopefully. And we're also going to have some high school homeschool classes that have been in the works as well, because I get a lot of girls who love birth and want to go into midwifery, but they're not really sure what that looks like. And most big organizations don't allow for under 18 to even take a class. And so, yeah, my heart is to help women learn and do what they're passionate. So and as a homeschooler too, I get it to be able to create that curriculum for the high schoolers as well. Do you get a client? Are you on call 24/7 via texting, calling, answering? Yeah. So, so getting clients come from a lot of different avenues that we talk about, but you are on call from that 37 weeks, that 42 weeks is generally what most people's contracts say. And that is full term window, right? So 37, 42 weeks. And so, I tell all my clients, I've already met with them twice prenatally, but I go on call in that window and I'm like, call me, text me, email me, you know, within normal business hours. But if you're in labor, call me and we go from there. But yeah, I am very available. I don't take massive amounts of clients because I have a whole lot of things going on with my big family and things, but some months are busier than others, but I try to make it very manageable. But I do kind of put those boundaries on there. So that's something you learn that we talk about too, because otherwise some people will just text you all day long. But if you set those kind of boundaries and let them know, like, text me during these hours about these things, but obviously in your labor, call me. My clients always text me and let me know, like, hey, I think my water broke. Hey, I think this is my bloody show. Hey, I think I lost my mucus plug. Hey, I think these are contractions. Like, they let me know, but I've never really had an issue with clients over texting and over calling and things like that. And so I think it's really the way you word things when you're meeting with clients in your free consultation, when you're meeting with them in prenatals, and having that understanding of what you do and what you don't do and how you can come alongside of them. And when they feel confident in who you are and that trust relationship, then really they kind of stick to asking you the questions, you know, that are pertinent and respecting like timeframes and things like that. So I know that July is super full, but we do have a self-paced option. It's not my favorite, and I usually only offer it to missionaries who live in countries where the time zone is very not compatible. We have two of them where it would be like 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. for them to take our classes. And so if you have a time zone issue, or you work, you know, second shift, or you have somebody in your family or best friend, you know, who's giving birth really soon, sometimes we can figure out how to maybe get you into that class or do a self-paced version as well. So Allison, if that's what you want to do, I can email you and give you some of those options. But I will say the self-paced option is not as fun because you don't get to do the interactive activities that we do. You don't have the other students. You don't have, you know, as much of that back and forth. And so it's still a good option. It's just not as fun of an option, in my opinion. But sorry, you mentioned we can advance while we start the course. Not sure you already gave me this answer. So what do you mean advance? I'm not sure what that means.
Sorry, Shana, it's me.
Yeah.
So I don't, you know how you mentioned that we can just start getting ready meanwhile the July course comes. Yeah. So, and you say just to start, reading at your books or doing something else. Is there anything else? Like we can do homework or we can just set assignments or anything like that, right?
Yeah. So doing usually it's books that people want to start on. So doing the reading list and doing the books and doing the book reports, even if you are like Allison, if you were to wait to take the September, you could do all of the other things ahead of time. So you could do the community resource list, which I can explain to you. You can do the books and book reports. You can do the bloodborne pathogen. I can give you access to that. And in the childbirth education, I can give you access to that. So you could do all of those things prior to starting class. And then as soon as you get into class, then you would be done and certified. So for you, the same thing, like we'll start in a little over a week, but yeah, you can do the book reports, you can start the community resource list, and the community resource list is exactly what it sounds like. So it's 40 plus community resources. So like the name, the address, the email, the website, the phone number, whatever that looks like. And kind of put into categories. So the best hospitals, the best providers, the best midwives, basically who would you refer your best friends to? So who's the chiropractor in town who does Webster technique, who works with pregnant women, who are the mental health professionals that work perinatally, who, what are all of those resources? So you can start to gather that together because that can take time. And if you have never given birth, this seems to be the hardest one for women who don't have kids yet because they don't know those things yet because they haven't personally experienced them. And so they struggle to take a little bit longer with that community resource list. So the more community resources that are local to you, that are in person, the better. Sometimes you want to check them out though. So like if you have pregnancy centers or birth centers or different things like that, and you don't know much about them, go in there, talk to them, find out, like, is this a place that you would actually recommend to someone? Because if it is, you can put it on the list. But if it is, not somewhere you would recommend, or you're seeing in mom groups that like, this is a really horrible place to get a circumcision, or a lip and tongue tie. Those are like some that I see a lot, like, do not go to this person for those things. You want to know that because you don't want to refer your client to them and then they have this horrible experience, so you can start working on the community resource list as well.
Got it. Okay, that answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah. What other questions do you ladies have? Well, Allison, if you want to reach out to me, we can brainstorm what that looks like for starting sooner than later. And then if any of you ladies have any other questions about our training or just trainings in general, let me know. I'd love to help you in whatever that looks like for your doula training. I know because I invited Christina, we talked a lot about what our organization looks like. But the goal is really to help you find that perfect fit. Just like not every client is right for me as a doula. Every doula training is not right for every person either. But really finding the right fit for you is going to be super helpful. So I want to help you do that, whether it's ours or not. And so feel free to email me. I will be super busy the rest of this week, and then I'm gone next week. But as soon as I can get to your email, I will get back to you and get you a response. But anything else? Well, thank you, ladies, for joining us. And again, let me know if you have any questions about what we do and what we offer, or just in doula work in general. So I love it. I've been doing it for 8+ years, going on 9 years. And I'm starting, well, both of us, Christina and I, are separately, but we're both student midwives as well, and working toward being midwives because we love this work so much. And so we will definitely be in families for a long time. So there are some downsides, but there's so many more upsides than downsides. But you gotta get your feet wet and get a good grip on those things. Otherwise it could be really overwhelming. So
I'm sorry to like throw a question in at 9:04.
No, you're fine.
Do you see, so like I don't have kids yet, but I work in corporate. I've worked in corporate for a decade. Like we're gonna be trying to have a baby soon. But do you see a lot of women kind of like transition from corporate into being a birth worker and like any
No, when I
challenges
read your
pop up with
email,
that?
yeah, not usually. I follow a lot of things where I see a lot of women leaving corporate to do a lot of things, but we just don't have corporate around me. So I guess that's not like super common for where I live. A lot of
That's okay
nurses,
too.
I've had a lot of nurses leave. I've had a lot of medical field people leave and do birth work. So no, I was super excited to see that you were considering that. I will say the income will be drastically different. But there is room to build that income up. A lot of doulas in bigger cities. I don't know, where are you, Amanda?
I'm in New York. So Leslie, you know, Leslie Matos, do you know who that is? She attends your ministry calls every
Okay.
month, and she recommended me to do this. I actually found her to be my doula because we're trying to
Awesome.
conceive.
Awesome.
But yeah, so I'm in New York, but not New
Yeah.
York City. I'm like 45 minutes north of the city. I grew up, yeah.
Okay.
A lot of people, but
Yeah.
and everything's expensive here, but I don't know.
Yeah. So I will say, like, bigger cities like that, you could make, again, cost of living is so different. So you would charge in the $2,000 range, depending on what that package looked like. Well, I guess you just hired potentially a doula, so you would know, and you could ask her what that looks like. But
Yeah.
If you do birth and postpartum work, that's where you can make six figures.
Yeah.
I would say overwhelmingly the people who make six figures have, availability for bigger cities, and they have that postpartum work, because the postpartum work is that consistent, very scheduled work, and then they throw the births in there and they can leave that consistent, sustainable job to go to births. So it's a great combination.
Yeah, because I do live in the bigger city of Indiana, so I do see actually a lot of people coming out of their corporate jobs and becoming birth workers. And a lot of the ones that are leaving the corporate jobs, they get certified as a birth doula, but they do exactly what Shanna said, where they become postpartum support instead. And
like
they're
first,
able
and
to,
then they
yeah.
Well, it's just easier.
And then they
like,
just squeeze in, because you get to control your schedule as a postpartum doula versus as a birth doula. Birth is so unexpected, and yes, you have their estimated due date, but you're not guaranteed that they're going to go on that due date. They can go 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after. But as a postpartum doula, you're contacted, you're usually hired before the baby's born, but you have it set, okay, when the baby's here, this is when I start, and then this is how long I'm going to be on contract for. Some people have a postpartum doula for like the first 6 weeks, while others will contract out for 6 months.
Mhm.
So it just depends on how you advertise yourself and how you want your contracts to go. But a lot of the doulas here in Indianapolis who have left corporate jobs are postpartum doulas.
I will say postpartum doulas make more money because
Yes.
you're not working with a client for one birth. You're working for a client for 6 weeks to 6 months, even longer. I will say you're in a great like spot, because you don't have littles yet. So you can like go hard and
You can
fast.
do both.
And you are working with the perfect demographic of the people who will hire you. Like, those people. You are working, your coworkers, your spheres of influences, your people groups that you're already involved in. Those are the people that are hiring postpartum doulas. And there are so few postpartum doulas compared to birth doulas. So there's a lot more saturation of birth doulas because it's been around longer than there are postpartum doulas. Like those, we had a postpartum doula here. She was a birth doula, and then she had her third baby, and her third baby had some medical issues. And so she stepped away from birth and started to do postpartum when when he had the ability to stay with someone else and things. And so she started charging a certain rate, and within a few weeks she had to up that rate, and then she had to up that rate again because she was so bombarded and overwhelmed with how many people wanted to hire her that she was like, I can't work all the time. Like, that's not the goal. But postpartum doulas can get hired. There's just not as much competition there, and there's more consistency there. So, and again, when you have those, it's a lot harder if you're 19 and your friends are all off at college. But if all your friends have corporate jobs, or they have a 2-person income, and they're like, hey, we need more help because I will be going back to work, like that's generally who hires postpartum doulas.
Yeah, that's who hires the postpartum doulas a lot of time, is someone who works in the corporate world.
Yep.
And they want that help transitioning back into it.
Got it. Yeah, New York is wonky. And I feel like also the fact that I plan on having a more faith-based practice. And I think there's a big hole there at the very least, because Leslie was like one of the there was two faith-based doulas within like 30 miles in every direction of where I live. That's bananas. I was like, what?
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah,
I would say like on the East Coast and West Coast, there's a lot of fear to define
to like
yourself.
openly say like, I love Jesus. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah,
a thing.
it's harder to say that you're not inclusive and you know, doing all of those things, because there can be some backlash to that.
Oh yeah, believe me, I know, especially where I'm from. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for your answer. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, when we do those calls, I generally like start them and then our speaker like talks, and so I don't even get to see who joins them. We just do them as just a way to connect people, and so I don't even know who's on those calls. So that's funny that you say that, because like I don't even know who attends them. But we have one Wednesday, so if you want to, it's a little different on Wednesday, but we if you want to come on Wednesday and join her, you can do that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, ladies. And again, I want to be here, you know, to answer any questions that I can to help you with this process. So yeah.
Thank you very much, you
Thank
all.
you.
That was very helpful.
Good.
Looking
Good.
looking forward to work with you guys. You guys
Yeah.
seem like
Awesome.
very knowledgeable. So we're gonna learn a lot from you guys. Yeah. Take
I
care.
love teaching. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.